Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to another exciting episode of Psychology Talks, where we explore science of human behavior, leadership, and the mindset that shape extraordinary impact. And today's episode is very special because we're going to explore what happens when the science of human behavior meets the art of caring and kindness. And we are talking about Caritas, a philosophy rooted in compassion, dignity, and human connection, and how it is transforming the leadership in healthcare. And that's why I have invited our guest, a very humble and a very wise, and like one of my favorite ladies, Darlene Cunha, a former a former chief nursing officer and COO, and a certified Caritas coach who has spent decades helping hospitals move from transactional care to cultures of healing and sustainable excellence, from restoring accreditation in hospitals in crisis of reducing turnover by 33% and improving patients' experience score. Darlene brings both strategic rigor and deep humanity to every challenge. So, without further ado, let's dive in. Uh, a very warm welcome, Darlene. Thank you for joining us today.
First, I want to thank you, Ambreen. What a beautiful and warm welcome. Thank
Oh,
you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I'm really, truly honored to be here. And I have to say, I'm thrilled to share with you how deeply our work really is aligned.
yeah.
The focus you bring around psychology, human behavior, and how people really experience the world is exactly where I believe healthcare has to continue moving. And because at the end of the day, healthcare is human work.
Yeah, absolutely. You're bringing so much wisdom and so much like a different perspective, which is much needed in the healthcare. And I know, like we were just talking before this show, that I met you first at the healthcare, and when you actually were sharing about the Caritas, and I said, "Oh my God, what a brilliant philosophy! I never heard of this word before." But it really resonated and it really fascinated me that how important it is for our current leadership. So that's why really I wanted to have this conversation. So anyways, I just gave a very brief introduction, but just tell us about yourself, that how did you started your journey, what the struggles you face, and how did you get or into this Caritas coaching?
Well, it really goes back to when I was just a young girl. When I think back to growing up, I was one of seven children, and my parents used to walk us to church to service on Sundays, and we would walk back home. And when we walked back home, we would pass this hospital that had a school of nursing attached to it. And there was a statue outside the School of Nursing, and the statue had its hands extended out. And I remember asking my father, I couldn't have been more than about 4 years old. I remember asking him, Daddy, why does she hold her hands like this? Kind of sort of up in the air. And he said, sweetheart, getting down on one knee and looking me square in the eye, he said, because when they take care of patients, they hold them right in the palm of their hand. They make sure they're safe and loved and cared for. And I kind of looked at him a little mystified, right? 4 years old.
Yeah.
And as we walked home, I had my hands extended, just like that statue. And each Sunday, as we went around and back home from church, I would stare up at that statue. Well, fast forward, many years later, my dad got sick and was treated at that hospital. And they did just that. They cared for him with that love and that dignity and that compassion. And I ended up going to nursing school there. And lo and behold, nursing theory that we were taught was based on Gene Watson's science of character. And so that started the foundation, growing up with it, not having words for it, right? We didn't call it Caritas. We called it compassion. We called it love. We called it caring. But it really started, I think, foundational for me back when I was just that small child. And so I've practiced that way my entire career, always modeling and integrating the heart, the head, the hands.
Wow, well, this is very, very inspiring that you are following your passion that you had when you were so young. So I think you're blessed because so many people are not able to actually pursue their passion or interest into the career, but actually what you had developed the interest in at such young age, and you're still doing the same thing, which is actually incredible. This is amazing. So yeah, just tell us about it. That what exactly is Caritas? What is the meaning of Caritas, and how it is linked to the leadership?
Yeah, I'd love to. So Caritas is often described as a philosophy, but I see it also as psychology in action inside healthcare. It's spiritual and that it honors meaning, dignity, and humanity, but it's psychological in how it supports emotional safety, nervous system regulation, and resilience. And it's operational because it changes how people lead, how they communicate, how they make decisions under pressure. When Caritas is lived, it becomes a leadership model that integrates how we do things, our head, our heart, and our hands. That's where real culture changes. It shows up in very real, very practical ways: authentic listening, being fully present, acknowledging emotion without trying to fix it immediately, right? Honoring each person's story, helping caregivers reconnect to the purpose. They're not soft skills, they're performance drivers. And when those behaviors are present, we see measurable shifts. Patient anxiety drops, communications improve, teams function better, and burnout risk decreases. Leaders who lead and truly model that behavior, that kindness, that compassion, those pauses when they're needed, bring together a unity of their team. You can feel it shift. Somebody once asked me, how do you know, Darlene, when you're in a loving organization? And I said, you feel it. You just feel it. You see it and you feel it.
Yes, I love that. Absolutely. And I cannot agree more on that, that you feel it, because these are all the energies around us that actually creates the environment. It's not I would just say, those like big values charts or big, big pictures and frames and titles. It doesn't make any culture a loving culture. A real culture is something where you feel loved, and you don't have to say it. When you just step into it, you feel the energy around you that, okay, this is where I belong. So I think that is what you're saying, that this is what Caritas is. But what do you think? Do you think that nowadays organizations are practicing this philosophy, or they are stuck somewhere, especially healthcare?
Yeah. So, my goodness, when you think about healthcare today, right, it's more advanced than ever, right? There's technology, there's data, there's predictive analytics, there's precision medicine, and all of that's important. But healing has never been technology alone. It really happens in those relationships, right? And so what we're seeing now is growing evidence that how caregivers feel directly influences how they perform. And when nurses experience that real emotional well-being, it's not surface happiness, but true support and connection, we see measurable shifts. And so what health systems are now trying to do is step back, pay attention. Clinical judgment sharpens, communication strengthens when people feel safer. And they're starting to see that when there's a trust that is truly embedded in their teams and it increases, safety outcomes improve. And so this is, we built in all of these efficiencies in healthcare, and we did it sort of in parallel and not with the team. This is the policy and the procedure you need to follow, instead of this is the policy and procedure, and here's why we need to follow, right?
Yeah.
Because healthcare without joy is not sustainable. Joy in healthcare is not a luxury. It's a performance state. And so Caritas reminds leaders that psychology, if you will, is not separate from healthcare. It's embedded in every interaction. And so how they show up emotionally, how they listen, how they create safety, those things directly influence the trust, the outcomes, the well-being for patients and care. And health systems are now stepping back and realizing the safety that they need to be providing to their caregivers and their workers. And that's where I see this strong alignment starting to come through now, because they're realizing that the human experience is not separate from performance. It is the foundation to it. And when caregivers feel safe, outcomes improve.
Yeah, absolutely. But do you think that it's still it's there, or it's a long way, or what is the major obstacle where people actually are not able to practice Caritas in corporate organizations and culture?
So I think they there's that tough skin. You got to have that thick skin in order to move the system forward, and they see Caritas as soft. Caritas provides boundaries for safety. It's not saying that we don't have performance metrics and we don't have policies and procedures, but they see this as being something soft, something that's going to take time to embed. And truly, something as simple as listening, those clinical rounds, when leaders show up, and they really ask the question, how are you today? And mean it, and then listen for the answer. We've performed with diminished resources for years in healthcare. This isn't a resource issue. This is a compassion issue that has eroded. And we're now starting to see health systems step back and realize that healthcare without care is not going to move any organization forward, right? Yeah. Executive leaders are beginning to ask different questions. Not, is compassion important, but what happens operationally when caregivers are not supported? Yeah. What does it look like? We see improvements in retention, engagement, absenteeism, patient experience, and safety when staff feel engaged, when staff are committed, and when staff feel safe. Yeah. They feel there's a curiosity that continues to grow in your work when you feel that you're part of a culture that truly cares about you. And I think health systems today are still trying to wrap their arms around that abstract feeling of the concept of Caritas, but it's not abstract. There are financial and operational realities to this. Emotional well-being is a leading indicator of performance, and they're starting to see that with surveys, colleague engagement surveys. When they write in, what is the one leading indicator that may drive you to look for a new position in the next year or two? And pay attention to that. What we've seen is it's mostly around caregiving. It's mostly around feeling like they belong to an organization that cares about them. And so that organizations are struggling with looking at the physical resource load. How are they going to support patients and caregivers when we have high vacancies in healthcare? And so they're now starting to realize that turnover decreases when staff feel cared for. They stay.
Yeah, I think it's all about that when they feel actually valued, heard, appreciated, they feel more safe. This is the, I think, basic, I would say, needs of human beings as well. Like in any relationship, it's not only in the in the workplace, but in any relationship, when you feel heard, when you feel that you are appreciated, your efforts are appreciated, this is how we feel like more to stay in that relationship. If any employee is just giving, they feel lost and burnout. In fact, that also, like when you were just saying that Caritas is one of the main philosophies, or when they put it in the practice, it helps create, safety, or prevent employees from burnout. So tell us a bit about more that how it can prevent burnout.
Yeah. So, burnout is when you've lost your emotional attachment to your work, right? You just show up, it becomes rote. And what we're trying to demonstrate is that this is a caregiver reality. We need to protect compassion and make sure it's not depleted. And so one of the biggest myths in healthcare is that compassion can drain people. And it's actually the opposite, right? When caregivers are connected to meaning, purpose, and authentic human connection, they're more resilient. Compassion becomes protective. It sustains people in really hard environments. So, when we're talking about emotional safety and belonging and purpose, those are human needs. And when they're met, people function differently, cognitively, emotionally, behaviorally. The biggest risk in healthcare isn't compassion. The biggest risk is expecting human beings to function inside systems that ignore their humanity and then wonder why they burn out or leave. And that's what we're seeing. Healthcare has become so efficiency driven that we forget it's people who drive the system. It's a human system of caring. And so burnout, we saw a lot of it during COVID, right? Because when you already have a strained and stressed environment, and then you add another stressor like a pandemic, your human ability to sustain yourself is to step back, to cocoon yourself, to not be connected, to just check the boxes, to forget about the care in healthcare. And so people burn out because we're wired to connect. We're wired for compassion. And so I go back to that big risk, expecting human beings to function inside systems that ignore the humanity. That's what drives burnout.
Yeah, absolutely. You explained it so beautifully. But this is really not. This is very much needed in all the organization, that that the connection, the human connection, when people can actually connect with each other, not but just saying that, oh, how are you and how we're going. And that's the main conversation that happens. But actually, they can connect at the deeper level where they feel safe. And but if I ask that, how these Caritas in practice provide them, how in if what are the practices that help them avoid the burnout, that of course we can create this the environment where people feel heard or safe. But if they have so much pressure on this, how they can actually avoid it, and how they can practice in the workplace, which could be toxic, which could be very high pressure environment, how they can practice it.
So I will tell you, there's a few things that we've done and that I've personally have implemented when I was a chief nursing officer. When you have rounds, true purposeful rounding, you have huddles. Every morning when I would round, we would have a morning huddle, and we would say, and Amber and I would tell you, this would take 20, 30 seconds. We're not talking a big time commitment, but staff looked forward to it. And I'll tell you what I used to do. And so we would come up to the nurses' station, and I'd say, time for our quick morning huddle. Tell me 3 good things. Something good between a colleague and a colleague, a good connection between a patient and a nurse and a colleague, and something good from home. So tell me 3 good things. And we know when you're talking about something good, this dopamine release. You start to feel the energy surrounding you and your colleagues. And so colleagues would openly share. Not only did we learn something beautiful about each other because we talked, maybe it was your child's first birthday. I didn't even know you had a child, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe your daughter was graduating college and I didn't know you had a graduation coming up. So you were sharing these details that brought you closer together as a community of caregivers and colleagues. And I would share with them, we do a really good job when we're raising children or we see children being kind to each other. We call it out. We say, Darlene, you were such a big sister. You were a good big sister helping, helping your sister with whatever it might be, right? We call out those behaviors because it reinforces the goodness of their relationship. But as adults, we tend not to do that. We don't say, hey, I saw you and Breen in that patient's room. Wow, you were so beautiful helping her with whatever it might be. If we did more of that, we would start to build that culture of safety, of love, compassion. We all want to be recognized for the work that we do, and we want to recognize each other. So just small details, small little nuances that we can begin to practice, those little call outs, those little huddles. I used to give a postcard that said, maybe this one day with this person at this one time, this moment is the very reason we're here on earth at this time. And on the back, I would write something special about that colleague. And I'd give them a blank one and I'd tell them to pay it forward. And so you see that ripple effect continues. Caritas is just about listening, being fully present, honoring the dignity and the differences in front of us and appreciating those, allowing space sometimes to just be quiet, right? Having a room or an area that staff can go to decompress for a short time helps. We know that healthcare is stressful. It's moving constantly. And, it's draining our people because we don't give them a chance to rest, even if it's just for a moment.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that part, that especially like you said, that we don't realize that these 10 seconds or 5 seconds of doing this practice can create such a huge impact on the work that they are delivering. Performance increases, the entire environment, elevates. So I think these are the small things can create such a big impact. So I love that. But one thing that coming to my mind is that sometimes, like, of course, most of the time we are all aligned, but there could be some employees, some team members which are not maybe aligned with it. They could be trying to take extra advantage, or maybe something who are not kind of aligned. So how do you deal with it? Of course, we can try to be kind with them, but at some point in time, you need to be tough with them. So how do you handle those cases that, because you need to take care of those people so they are not to protect the environment so others are not affected. So tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, there's always going to be the laggers, right? You have the early adopters, you have those that are sitting on the fence and then come along, and then you have the laggers, those that just sort of sit back, don't actively engage, and don't help, and their silence actually does more damage than good, right? So at that moment, typically the team will call out that person because they're sort of pulling them away from the very foundation they're trying to build. Yeah. But as a leader, I like to check in on those humans and sit down, because we all come to work with different backgrounds, different experiences, what's happening in your life. We can't always separate what's happening at home when we show up to work, right? So, what is it that is not connecting? Because human care, human caring, is what the art of human is what nursing and the art of human caring is all about. It's coming together. And so if you're in a profession where you can't see how compassion really shapes your work, I want to know more about that. I want to be able to create that space to process those hard moments, instead of pushing straight through to the next task. Sit down with that colleague. And what I have found, is sometimes their voices get shut down quickly, especially if they're not agreeing with the majority. And so we always want to make sure those voices are heard, because that may be a perspective we didn't even think of. And so those small moments of sitting down with colleagues to really understand what the disengagement is related to, I have found drives acceptance. They may be the quiet voice in the background. Sometimes they're introverted. Sometimes they're just not interested. But typically, there's a driving force that is making them not connect. But if we practice Caritas, really practice it, those are the colleagues, the patients, the leaders that we need to get to know a little bit more. We want to know why they feel the way they feel, because compassion itself can't be scripted. There's conditions that allow it to thrive, right? And so when we create structures for listening, reflection, and psychological safety, compassion becomes sustainable instead of episodic.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this. It's just like, if I take out just one point, that is just like building a human connection and listening to them, that changes everything, changes the entire perception. And again, like maybe we are the one who are judging someone who's very quiet, or maybe who we may see sometimes that they're rebellious. But if we find out what are the reasons, then it's maybe that our perspective changes, to understand, because we've never seen what they've been looking and what they've been going through in their life. So I think that's a beautiful way to actually bring alignment, bring psychological safety in the place where people feel safe and they can share what they are going through, and they're not like they don't feel the fear that they'll be judged. And I think that's when the creativity sparks and people can actually share openly. And I think that's how the organization also move forward in that. So I just want to ask it, can you share any example, or maybe an interesting, maybe an event where like where you have actually practiced Caritas and it brought change in the organization? Any interesting example, if you could recall or if you can share?
Well, I share one story because it was so profound, and I'll share it with your listeners here. I was fresh out of nursing school, maybe a month, and I used to show up on my unit early all the time because I loved being in the hospital. I loved being in that environment. And as I was approaching the nursing station, I heard the buzz of everybody talking, saying, I already had him. I'm not taking him. He's your patient today. No, he's yours. And then all of a sudden, collectively, they turned their heads and they looked at me and they said, your turn. And so what they were referring to was a patient they had labeled as being difficult. And so was he cantankerous? Was he challenging? Did he push all your buttons? Oh, yeah. But when I literally took the time to go in and hold his hand, his name was Gus, and I can still see him, his long, lanky, 6'6" body. I can still see him. But what he taught me was compassion in silence, compassion with deep listening, compassion without judgment, love without judgment. We started to see this demeanor shift and soften. My colleagues started assisting me in the room and not deciding who was going to assist, but they would willingly come in. And what he taught us collectively was that we all come to need care at different times in our lives, and we all bring different experiences and heaviness that we may not know. And sometimes patients don't want to share it right away. But if we take the time to listen, and sometimes without words, we find out what really is driving that fear, which is driving the behavior. And so Gus was our teacher. He taught all of us. He was Caritas in action, and he didn't even know it. And so he taught us how to love patients just like him, and how to love each other and care for each other and support one another. So my story of Gus goes back 40 plus years. I still see his face. I see his loving sister. I see my team that I worked with. And we still talk about him. We get together, four or five of us that get together for breakfast every few months. And we still talk about Gus. So that's how you know Caritas lives on.
Wow, what an amazing story. Like, yes, there are some events, some memories, which some events actually are imprint on the memory, and you cannot forget them. And like whenever we visit these memories, we learn from them. Like each time we have this, like we revisit them, we have this feeling of joy, and then we learn from them. So like, I love that example that you shared. Thank you for sharing it. I also want to ask that nowadays, like especially AI is coming into this, it's been advancing very rapidly. It's taking over lots and lots of jobs very quickly, and that builds up the pressure on like people. Also, it puts a pressure on organizations as well. So what do you think? How do you see the future of, let's say, healthcare, especially in the age of AI?
Yeah, great question, right? Future of healthcare. Woo!
Yeah.
If we want sustainable healthcare, we cannot build it on efficiency alone, right? And AI helps with that efficiency, but we have to build it on human connection, psychological safety, purpose-driven work, compassionate leadership. When we prioritize human experience, it becomes safer, more stable, more effective. And I'm not talking about going backwards. This is about integrating science and technology with humanity, because the future of healthcare won't be decided by technology alone, right? It'll be decided by organizations that understand that humans heal humans and build systems that support that truth. We have virtual nursing now that you'll see across the country. It didn't replace the nurse at the bedside. It augmented that care to help build in efficiencies, so the nurse at the bedside had more time for those Caritas moments, more time to sit at the bedside and listen to that patient and not be pulled away to document, chart, talk with other caregivers, to really be present with that patient. So it's a partnership of collaboration. Trinity Health started their virtual nurse program, and I was very much a part of that as one of their change coaches. And this was, you talk about trying to get the staff at the bedside to understand we're not replacing you, that the virtual nurse is actually your partner in care. And when that collaboration clicked, it was a beautiful thing to watch. And I would just see and feel that shift on the units, that team building, that trust that came with sharing the assignment, and patients feeling that love that they not only had the team at the bedside, but they had another nurse that was also looking out for them. And, when we start to look at those efficiencies in the way of human caring, healthcare will move forward, really embracing that full humanity.
Yes, I think that's a very positive outlook. And I think that's what exactly we need in the healthcare and in all the other industries, because I think AI, as you said, is there to augment and to support humans, not to replace them. It cannot replace them, because one of the main reason I would just say that now human needs human connection. It doesn't need a soulless and algorithmic connection. Although there are lots of cases these days, I mean, we just hear that like people are falling for AI generated chat box and whatnot. But the thing is that at the end of the day, they need a human connection. It can just like surge, create or push a dopamine hike, but it cannot sustain for longer. At that time, when that surge goes down, then they need a human connection. They cannot survive on just a chatbot. So yeah, I think you're just absolutely right in that. So yeah, and I know that we can actually go on and on this topic, because it's such a beautiful topic and it's much needed, not only for the healthcare, for I think for all the organization and corporate environment, because like humans make these organizations are not just these documents. People are working there, so we need such human connection at every workplace. So it's very much needed everywhere. So before we actually close the show, what one piece of advice you would give to all the leaders to have the balance in performance and empathy and practice Caritas more often?
Music to my ears, right? If there's one message I would leave listeners with, it's this. We don't have to choose between excellence and humanity in healthcare. The future requires both. Because when we bring heart, when we bring our presence and our psychological understanding into healthcare environments, we don't just improve care. We restore meaning to the work, and we create systems where people, patients, and caregivers can actually thrive. So I guess my call today would be simple: bring Caritas back, put the heart back at the center of healthcare, and let the psychology of that, the psychology of compassion and love and care, guide us in how to do it well. Because we cannot do this beautiful art of human caring without it.
Yes, I love that. Absolutely love that advice. And I'm sure all the listeners love that too. So, and what is the best way to reach out to you?
The best way today is to just connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very visible, very active. My email address is on there, so you can get right to me. So I'd love to hear from the listeners. If there's any way I can help support you, please reach out.
Yes, I love that. Your LinkedIn link is already in the comments, and it's also in the sticker. So those who are listening, watching, or even watching the recording, whoever wants to connect, please reach out to Darlene through the LinkedIn. So anyways, so here we actually reached to the end of the show. So thank you so much, Darlene, for being here, sharing your wisdom, sharing this philosophy of Caritas, which is much, much, much needed in this era, because when people are more into technology, they are more, I would just say, although they are technologically connected, but at the human side, they are very much disconnected. So I think we need to bring back Caritas, not only in all the workplace, but also I think in our lives, in our all relationships. It's much needed. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today and to share with everyone the beautiful art of character. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.